Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Clouse and I'm one of the instructors here for the WAM department at Life Pacific College. And one of the things I want to talk to you today is about being a producer or a studio engineer. Now, one of the things about being a producer is that oftentimes when people think about being a producer is that it's not really a musical thing. It's not really grafted into the musical arena. Even though you're working with musicians, you're working with artists, it's more of a scientific approach. It's not really a musical approach. Well, there's 3 myths that I want to talk about today and kind of debunk in regards to being a studio engineer or a producer. And myth number 1 is that you have to be really techy in order to be a studio engineer. That's not true. There's plenty of gadgets out there, there's plenty of gizmos out there, but you don't have to be super techy in order to do it. And myth number 2 is that all this equipment you have to get is really expensive. Okay, that may be true. There is expensive equipment out there, but there's not so expensive equipment out there. And do you need that kind of equipment in order to get a good recording? Not true. And myth number 3 is that it's a science. Being a producer is a science. Well, you'll see from what we talk about is that it's more musical than most people think. All right, so let's take myth number 1, is that you have to be really techy. You have all this equipment in the studio, you have to know how to use everything. Well, answer these 3 questions. Do you know how to use a computer? Do you know how to use a computer keyboard? Do you know how to use a computer mouse? If you answered yes to all 3 of those, you could be a studio engineer. Yes, there's lots of musical equipment as far as interfaces, microphones, all of the fun stuff, okay? But essentially, if you have basic computer skills, you can be a studio engineer. Think of it this way. There's plenty of legends out there in the engineering world, in the producer world, okay? Before the 90s, everybody was tracking to tape. Everything was done on analog equipment. There were no computers involved. However, over the course of time, technology evolved and computers became more apparent inside the industry, inside the producer world, inside the studios. And even since then, computers have gotten faster, technology as far as equipment has gotten better. And so with those legends, they've had to evolve as well as technology has evolved. So essentially, if you have basic computer skills, and take it from me, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer when it comes to technology and computers. So I learned it. So if I can learn it, I know you can learn it. All right, so now let's talk about the second myth, that everything is way too expensive, that you have to have a super large budget in order to do anything. All right, there's plenty of equipment out there that is really expensive, and there's plenty of equipment out there that's not as expensive, okay? Here's a good example. Let's say John Mayer walks into a guitar store and he picks off a $100 guitar off of the wall. Do you think John Mayer can make that guitar sound pretty good? Probably, because John Mayer has developed his guitar playing skill. All right, now let's reverse it. Let's say you have a guitar student who's been playing 1 year, and they walk into a store and they take off the wall a $3,000 Gibson ES335. Do you think that student is going to make that guitar sound good? It's doubtful. The point is, with this equipment, they're just tools. They're tools of the trade. There's no piece of equipment out there that will fix your poor skill. You have to develop the skill, and you have to start somewhere. So if you're learning and you're going after it and you're pressing through some of the things, you make lots of mistakes, you'll learn it. You don't need to have expensive equipment. You can start off with not so expensive equipment and develop your skill. All right, so lastly, there's myth number 3, that being a studio engineer is more of a science and not necessarily an art. There is science that applies to it. You know, there's frequencies and there's physics of sound. It's not necessarily a requirement. You don't have to have a degree in order to be able to be a studio engineer. However, there's often times when you're in a studio and you're tracking, or you're mixing on headphones or on your speakers, or you're doing some mastering, and You know, you've done all this work with frequencies and what have you, and the main question that a lot of professionals just ask themselves is, does it sound good? Does it sound good? At the end of the day, your listeners are not going to be, oh, well, they did this frequency, or they carved out this frequency. They're going to be bobbing their head to the music if it sounds good, because it's art, it's entertainment. And essentially that's what a producer knows how to capture well. They know how to capture art well because they know that they have a value for art, for good art. So, do you need to have all the information about science? It helps, but it's not a requirement.